Reparations must be paid for the slave trade.
Financial reparations are long overdue, Ghana's president said on Tuesday, as compensation for the transatlantic slave trade.
Predictably, the question of reparations becomes a debate only when it comes to Africa and Africans. When the British ended slavery, all the owners of enslaved Africans received reparations to the tune of some 20 million pounds sterling, the equivalent today of some 20 billion pounds sterling. But enslaved Africans themselves did not receive a penny. Likewise, in the United States of America, owners of slaves received $300 for every slave they owned. The slaves themselves received nothing.
Reparations must be paid for the slave trade. No amount of money will ever make up for the horrors, but it would make the point that evil was perpetrated, that millions of productive Africans were snatched from the embrace of our continent and put to work in the Americas and the Caribbean without compensation for their labor. If there are any hesitations in some minds about the paying of reparations, it is worth considering the fact that when slavery was abolished, the slave owners were compensated for the loss of the slaves because the human beings were labeled as property, deemed to be commodities. Surely, this is a matter that the world must confront and can no longer ignore. The African Union has authorized Ghana to hold a global conference on the issue in November in Accra. Reparations must be paid for the slave trade, and it bears repeating that we are not craving for sympathy, and we do not want to be a scar on anybody's conscience. But we cannot, and the world should not pretend that the present-day economic and social conditions of Africa have nothing to do with the historical injustices that have fashioned the structures of the world. It is time to acknowledge openly that much of Europe and the United States have been built from the vast wealth harvested from the sweat, tears, blood, and horrors of the transatlantic slave trade and the centuries of colonial exploitation. Reparations must be paid for the slave trade. The world has been unwilling and unable to confront the realities of the consequences of the slave trade, but gradually this is changing, and it is time to bring the subject of reparations firmly to the fore. Reparations must be paid for the slave trade on the illicit flow of funds from Africa, which states that Africa is losing annually more than 88 billion United States dollars through illicit financial outflows. Yes, those monies too must be returned to the continent. Reparations must be paid for the slave trade.